Welcome to the Cold War Nuclear Weapons Complex. This presentation is based on my personal experiences as a Cold War Patriot working in the weapons complex for over 30 years. The Cold War was an intense rivalry between the United States and the USSR lasting nearly 50 years, 1945 to 1992. It was called the Cold War because there wasn't a direct battlefield confrontation between the two superpowers. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union and the United States established vast nuclear weapons manufacturing capabilities and produced enough weapons to wipe out the entire world's population, creating a dangerous standoff based on MAD, mutual assured destruction. During the Cold War, some 700,000 Americans worked at secret locations throughout the nation to maintain our nuclear deterrent. In the process, many contracted illnesses from radiation and exposure to toxic materials. Even today, many still suffer from the effects, as well as those people living downwind from the manufacturing facilities and the nuclear sites. The first atomic bomb was detonated on July 16, 1945. It was the dawn of the nuclear age at a remote area of the New Mexico desert called Llanura del Muerto, Spanish for the Trail of the Dead Man. The Trinity test was the culmination of efforts of the ultra-secret Manhattan Project. It was called the Gadget, designed and assembled at Los Alamos, New Mexico under the direction of Robert Oppenheimer. It was a plutonium fission bomb with a yield of 20 kilotons of TNT. In August, less than 1 month after the Trinity test, two bombs were dropped in Japan, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, bringing to an end the World War II and the start of the Cold War. Just 4 years after the Trinity test, much to the surprise of the experts, the USSR detonated its first nuclear weapon called Joe-1 in honor of Joseph Stalin, the Soviet dictator. The success of the Soviet bomb was based in large part on espionage when communist spies infiltrated the Manhattan Project. It's ironic that many of the purloined secrets went through my hometown of Great Falls, Montana, as part of the Lend-Lease program in support of our then Soviet ally. With the advent of the Soviet bomb, the world became much more dangerous, and the nuclear race began in earnest. And over the next 40-plus years, both sides built, tested, and deployed thousands of nuclear weapons. Shown here are models of the bombs dropped on Japan. Little Boy dropped on Hiroshima was a uranium gun-type bomb, where two pieces of highly enriched uranium were shot into each other to initiate the nuclear reaction. Fat Man was a plutonium implosion device, where a hollow sphere of plutonium encased in high explosives, and when the high explosives detonated, it drove the plutonium into a dense configuration, initiating the nuclear reaction. As shown here, both weapons were huge, unwieldy bombs, but over the years the development of the weapons became much smaller and capable of use in both missiles and to a much smaller extent in artillery shells with much higher explosive yields. The U.S. weapons program essentially began in a squash court at Stagg Field in Chicago, where the world's first nuclear reactor was assembled and operated. It consisted of graphite blocks interspersed with natural uranium in a pile configuration. Shown here is an artist's rendering of the reactor. It was designed and built by physicist Enrico Fermi with the assistance of fellow scientists and engineers as part of the Manhattan Project. From its humble beginnings at Stagg Field, the weapons complex soon expanded nationwide, as shown here, spanning the entire nation from Hanford's plutonium production in the state of Washington to the production of neutron generators at the Pinellas plant in Florida. During my time working in the complex, I worked at or managed projects at most of the major sites, including Hanford, Los Alamos, Livermore, Rocky Flats, Savannah River, Fernald, the Nevada Test Site, and the Idaho National Engineering Laboratory near Idaho Falls, Idaho. My first job after graduating from the University of Montana was at the Hanford site located in southeastern Washington. The site layout as shown here was based on a philosophy to separate the various facilities so that an accident at one would not affect the others. The reactors were located in the 100 area along the banks of the Columbia River. chemical processing of the irradiated fuels were in the 200 areas on a plateau several miles from the 100 area. The 300 area further south along the river housed the laboratories, fuel element production, and various shops. The first Hanford reactor was designated as the B reactor. The design and construction of the reactor was an extraordinary demonstration of engineering and construction efforts, considering the fact that in October 1943, construction started. Then, just a year later, on September 13, 1944, the first fuel element was charged by Fermi. And on September 26, 1944, the reactor went operational, or in terms of nuclear jargon, it went critical. Plutonium produced from the B reactor fueled the Trinity and test and the Nagasaki bomb. This slide shows the face of the B reactor that was a water-cooled, graphite-moderated reactor penetrated with hundreds of holes for the fuel elements. Each fuel element was made up of 64 slugs, 3/4 of an inch by 12 inches, of uranium encased in aluminum. Refueling was by simply pushing the new fuel elements into the holes, driving the irradiated slugs out the rear, where they were dropped into water-filled cooling basins. It was an ingenious design. Shown here are the irradiated fuel slugs in the reactor cooling basin. The characteristic blue glow is due to the Cherenkov radiation, named after a Russian scientist. The fuel was allowed to cool for 120 days prior to processing to recover the plutonium. I should note that during the Cold War, the Air Force conducted an experiment where the irradiated slugs were processed before the 120-day cooling period. It was called the Green Run, and as a result, millions of curies of radioactive gas were released beyond the boundaries of the site, contaminating thousands of acres of farmland downwind of the site. However, since the contamination was invisible, those affected were unaware of the hazards. B reactor was the first of 9 reactors at Hanford. N reactor was the last. This slide shows the reactor beside the Columbia River with another reactor in the background. N reactor was a dual-purpose reactor for the production of plutonium and power generation. 2 areas, 200 West and 200 East, provided space and separation between the plutonium recovery plant and the plutonium finishing plant. Both sites were self-sufficient, including dedicated steam and power generation, maintenance facilities, and other miscellaneous support facilities. This is the PIREX plant. PIREX stands for plutonium-uranium extraction, located in the 200 East area. It was a state-of-the-art continuous solvent extraction process, replacing the batch processes of the initial separations plants. The process consisted of several stages: dissolution, followed by separation of plutonium from uranium fission products, then separation of the plutonium from the uranium, and final stage, purification and concentration of the plutonium. It took tons of uranium just to produce several pounds of plutonium. This was my first assignment at Hanford as a laboratory technician. Shown here is the interior of the above-grade structure of the PIREX plant. Processing took place in underground cells to provide shielding from the intense radiation. After the 120-day cooling period, the irradiated slugs were transferred from the reactors to the plant in shielded railroad cars for processing. The open space provided for overhead crane operations with access to the process cells, covers, and the installation of the process cells themselves. The process cells were fabricated in shops in the 300 area and transferred to the plant by rail. Hanford had its own railroad. Processing equipment included all the necessary tankage, piping, electrical, and instrumentation, all of which were operated remotely from a central control room. During process operations, millions of gallons of liquid waste were generated containing fission products and therefore highly radioactive. Pictured here are the tanks under construction. The waste was sent to these underground tanks for long-term storage. However, many of the tanks developed leaks and today the DOE is spending billions of dollars to treat the waste at Hanford and other DOE sites. After several months as a lab tech at the Purex plant, I was assigned to the finishing plant as a line supervisor on the button line. Here the Purex product was converted to metal in the form of buttons, which were machined to form pits or triggers. Plutonium, aptly named for the Roman mythological god of the dead, the ruler of the underworld, is an extremely hazardous element to deal with. It is highly radioactive, with the primary emission of alpha particles and with secondary emissions of neutrons and gamma rays. If ingested, alpha particles can cause cancer of the lungs and the bone structure. Continued exposure to the gamma neutrons can also cause radiation sickness. Chemically, it is a highly reactive element and extremely pyrophoric. Metal chips can self-ignite in humid air. This was a common occurrence at several plutonium processing facilities and the cause of 2 devastating fires at the Rocky Flats plant. Also, because of its fissionable characteristics, it can sustain a chain reaction if sufficient material, called a critical mass, and in the right configuration, called a critical array. Therefore, all processing in the finishing plant was done in glove boxes, cubical stainless steel structures with plexiglass windows fitted with glove ports, along with stringent controls to prevent any accidental criticality. The finishing plant did experience an accidental criticality, the details of which are discussed in my book. Pictured here is a plutonium button inside of a glove box. Each button weighed 2.5 kilograms. Seen here is the final product at the finishing plant, a nuclear weapon trigger, or commonly referred to as a pit. In order to ensure enough bomb-making material, facilities were built to produce enriched uranium and other fissionable material. Seen here is the K-25 gaseous diffusion plant at Oak Ridge, another Manhattan Project site. Natural uranium contains 0.7% of fissional isotope uranium-235. In order to produce weapons-grade uranium, the uranium-235 is enriched to greater than 95% 235. Gaseous diffusion requires thousands of stages of separation units, thus the enormous building shown here. K-25 enriched uranium to 50% 235. During the Cold War, the Oak Ridge plant expanded to include a variety of processes and facilities to support the war effort. It became the Oak Ridge National Laboratory. During my career, I've worked with several entities at ORNL for the development, design, and construction of facilities for processing high-enriched uranium. The Y12 cyclotron at Oak Ridge, shown here, is another method of enriching uranium. The K-25 gaseous diffusion plant enriched uranium to about 50% U-235 as feedstock to Y12, which enriched it to greater than 90%. Other diffusion plants were built during the Cold War at Paducah, Kentucky, and Portsmouth, Ohio, each with the capability to produce weapons-grade uranium. The Manhattan Project needed a secret site to design and build nuclear weapons. The site chosen was Los Alamos, located in the northern New Mexico on the flanks of the Jemez Mountains. Here we see the mesas on which Los Alamos was built. It was here, under the direction of Robert Oppenheimer, that the laboratory designed and built the bomb for the Trinity test and the Nagasaki bomb. This slide shows a portion of today's Los Alamos. This is only a small portion of the entire site, which is spread out over several mesas. Not shown off to the right is the town of Los Alamos itself. The lab continues as a weapons lab and other scientific endeavors. I worked at several projects at Los Alamos, including plutonium processing and design of linear accelerator facilities. It's somewhat ironic that during my final year at Fleur Daniel, I was assigned to the lab to manage engineering supporting the development of facilities to dispose of surplus plutonium. I had started my career producing plutonium and now some 30 years later, I was working to dispose of it. This is a weapons lab near Livermore, California. It was established during the Cold War to spur competition with Los Alamos. I worked on several projects at Livermore, including upgrades to the existing plutonium facilities, and participated in workshops and managed the development of conceptual designs for the ground-based laser that was part of President Reagan's Strategic Defense Initiative. Rocky Flats was established near Boulder, Colorado to provide redundancy in pit production due to the advancement of Soviet long-range bombers, making Hanford vulnerable. It eventually became the primary pit production facility operating from 1952 to 1987. It was beset with contamination problems caused by accidents involving plutonium. The 371 Chemical Processing Building had numerous petroleum spills and accidents, once identified as the most dangerous building in the United States. It also experienced two major fires in the Foundry Building and was shut down by the FBI in the late 1980s due to safety issues. I spent many weeks at the site managing engineering efforts for facility upgrades. My work required entry into many contaminated areas to verify as-built conditions prior to design of the upgrades. The Savannah River site, or SRS, was built at DuPont in the 1950s at the personal request from President Truman to increase the nation's plutonium and tritium production capabilities. It is located near Aiken, South Carolina, along the banks of the Savannah River. I managed two major tritium projects at SRS. The Tritium Recovery Project in support of the new production reactor and, in concert with site and DOE engineers, developed engineering data for the new tritium production capabilities. Located west of Idaho Falls, Idaho, INEL was established with various missions: experimental reactor testing, recovery of high-enriched uranium from spent naval fuels, training of nuclear naval personnel, site of the first operational plutonium breeder reactor, site of the full-scale mock-up of the Nautilus reactor and control room. By the way, Nautilus was the first operational nuclear submarine. It was also the site of the first breeder reactor, EBR-1, fueled with plutonium and generated electrical power to the nearby town of Arco. INEL was the site of the reprocessing facility to recover high-enriched uranium from naval fuels. I worked on numerous facility designs, both for upgrading existing facilities and the construction of new facilities at the site, including the new Florinel storage facility. This facility provided new hand dissolvers for fuel and storage of irradiated fuels. I also participated in the upgrades to the process cells in the existing processing facility and provide engineering direction for the preliminary designs for a project called the Special Manufacturing Capabilities. Located in the northern part of INEL, the nuclear airplane hangar became the site for the Black Project SMC. The hangar was built to support the Air Force's proposed nuclear airplane that never flew. However, the completed hangar provided an area in which an entire manufacturing complex could be built and operated, hidden from view from the Soviet satellites. The secret project was depleted uranium armament for the Abrams battle tanks. The Nevada test site is about 65 miles north of Las Vegas, Nevada. One of my most interesting projects was management of conceptual designs for the ground-based laser, which, as noted, was part of the SDI program. Part of my job included site visits of potential sites for the facility, including Livermore, California, White Sands Missile Range, and the Nevada test site. During the flyover of the test site, I was able to see the results of thousands of weapons tests. This slide shows the results of both above and below ground tests. My site review trips to potential locations for the ground-based laser provided me the opportunity to have a helicopter tour of the White Sands. During the tour, we landed at the Trinity site, where in a fenced-in enclosure is this obelisk, where it all started. This presentation provides a summary of my experiences working in the Cold War nuclear weapons complex. My ebook brings much more information and is available online at Amazon.com and BarnesandNoble.com. Thank you.